Welcome to What the Theory with your man Joel, and today we're going to be talking about property. Alan has so graciously decided that he's going to help me this time. Every time I do this, there's going to be a title here and a title here. So we've got like skills now. We're in a different level. As the owner of this pod, I'm very proud of the labor that Alan is doing on behalf of this podcast. Anyway, today's discussion really is about property, and I'll start by saying what the thrust of the discussion on property is about. I was talking to my father recently, and he was talking about land that we have in Fort Portal, and about how there are occupants on that land, and we're trying to, make sure that we're compensating them before we do some work on it. And as I was thinking about it, the individuals, when we went to talk to those tenants on that piece of land, they, it's held in custom. This is in Toro. So a lot of land in Toro has a customary nature of holding property. And for them, they don't even think about, this guy I was talking to doesn't even have the conception of property as a commodity. It's just a place that he lives, he grazes his cattle, and he's able to make subsistence for himself. He's not thinking of it as something that he needs to transfer to someone else. Therefore, he's never needed a piece of paper to be able to transfer that. Which is so different to me, because if I don't have that piece of paper, I don't have property. And if I don't have that property, I'm unable to transfer it to someone else. And in the drive back, I thought, well, what is property? And that reminded me of a French guy called Pierre Joseph Proudhon. So the first segment today is going to be, what the hell is property? Now, property, if you look at any constitution, is always assumed, it's not defined. And de facto, whenever constitutions were written, you realize that people existed before those constitutions were set. And they only recognized the rights that probably existed theretofore. And you can always look this up, it's just called What is Property by Pierre Joseph Proudhon, and you can read it in your own free time. Property rights have, sort of a long history. It's a concept that has morphed over time. Even though we've used land, particularly as a chief piece of property, it has extended to things such as the stable, to ownership of ourselves, ownership of movable collateral, ownership of even ideas, things that are abstract like songs or patents and things of that nature. And today's discussion is going to be about what does that imply, how does it function under a socioeconomic system, and the equality of legality versus morality. So we'll go back to the start of what property is. The idea of property is maybe it's a socially and civilly created idea. It means, according to, I would say, it's a sort of despotic claim that you have to exclude other people from something that you own. If you have a piece of land, you enclose it, you probably put a fence around it and make sure that no one can take part in utilizing that land other than yourself or without your own permission. But prior to this, if we look at English common law, which is, there's a reason the Commonwealth is spread across so many countries. Those guys really conquered a lot of the world. And that's where a lot of our legal systems obtain a lot of the definitions they have for property and property rights. If you look at the constitution of whatever country you're in, those property rights are assumed and not sort of defined. Property, is assumed and not defined. The rights are then given to you as a means for you to be able to transfer it, to make legal use of it, to be able to, prevent other people from utilizing it. And you can use the law to stop them from utilizing whatever it is that you own as your own property. The history of property is marred with a lot of blood. It's marred with a lot of controversy. And in the English case, to be particular, if you imagine in the medieval days, you had landlords. Those were sort of lords that were granted those titles by the nobility, by the royals. And by having dominance over that land, they got to say what would happen on those pieces of land. Now, the relationship between those tenants, who were the commoners, and the lords was such that the commoners worked, tilled the land, and paid homage to their lords and ladies. That meant a portion of their harvest would be taken up by the lords and ladies. With merchants taking more and more precedence in cities, if you were a lord and say you owned vast tracts of land, of which you were now having many commoners growing whatever food crops they had and then giving you a portion, you might then think, well, it makes more sense for me to stop the communal use of this land where people are grazing their cattle, they're grazing their livestock, they're growing their crops, and instead grow some cash crops. You could grow something that you could then spin out and then send to the cities for the merchants to be able to pay you in return for those raw materials that they would then use to make processed goods. You could instead push out the commoners that live on your land and thereby utilize it as a place for you to have your sheep graze. You're able to share them and sell that worn sheep to people to be able to wear nice clothes like the one I'm wearing right now. And that obviously led to conflicts between the commoners and the lords and ladies. And instinctively, you might think, well, you can go to the law to be able to protect the commoners. But the law at that time only recognized individual rights to property. So you couldn't go in common. You couldn't say as a commune that, well, we customarily use this land and we want to maintain the sort of usage and access to that piece of property. Secondly, the courts also were utilizing written notices. And as you know, most people who were living in the commons were not literate. They didn't have access to being able to write out or even understand the legality of what it is that they were trying to engage in. So the history of property, especially land, has been wrought with power dynamics and has always privileged the people who historically had ownership of pieces of land. But if you go back further and further, as I did as I was trying to look through this, property rights in ancient civilizations always varied. For example, in the Greeks, there was a unique protection that was made for private property, but privation, it meant, even in the word, it means that you're taking away from the common something for special use, but it is granted to you by the common society, shall we say. Ancient Greek property rights developed from those based on force to those that were based on notion. In ancient Rome, which followed the Greek model, ownership or control over agrarian land played an essential role in the wealth and growth of individuals of the state. So the very first wealthy people, the very first dominant groups of people were those who had say over land and property. And that led to what you would call the priest class, that led to the knight class, that led to people who were stratified in such a way that they didn't physically have to mix their labor anymore with pieces of property in order for them to earn. Now, you fast forward that a little bit further to places like like in East Africa. So everyone knows in the African context, land is not an easy thing. So I'm Ugandan, and in Uganda, land reform has been a very big issue. Traditionally here, land is held in sort of four different ways, and I need to make sure that I say this properly. I don't want to step on any toes. So the four forms of land ownership in this country are freehold, leasehold, milo, and freehold, leasehold, milo, and what am I missing? Freehold, leasehold, milo, customary. Yes, the one I've been talking about. Yeah. So customary land, like I spoke about, is about communal ownership, and customary acts that have been done from time immemorial. That is either a clan, a tribe, or a group of people hold that land in common, and they decide who gets to utilize it, who gets to transfer those rights to other individuals. Now, those the vast majority of land in Uganda is actually under that customary ownership. The second form is freehold. So freehold is more or less what is in a lot of the quote-unquote developed world, meaning that someone can hold land in perpetuity. You can buy a piece of land and your ownership stake lasts for eternity. You can do anything within legal bounds on that piece of property. The third piece is what you would call the leasehold, and that is for individuals to only have it for a period of time, either 49 or 99 years. And then the last is Milo. The Milo land is a special recognition of that tenant and landlord relationship, where tenants are also given a piece of, they're given ownership rights. And that's particularly here in Buganda, parts of Bunyoro, and also parts of Toro. And that's been fraught with a lot of controversy, especially when the colonial government decided that it was going to make recognition of that, and then subsequently different regimes that have had leadership over Uganda have had quarrels with the different kingdoms, because the locus of power of those kingdoms is also the way they're able to grant and be seen as legitimate holders of properties and land in a country where agrarian society is the dominant one. Now, why am I talking about all these things, this dry subject, and all of you guys know everything about land? The main philosophical question that we have is, how did these things get coded to begin with? And two, how do we differentiate between private property and personal property? Now, private property is the issue at hand. Private property is when you take from the commons and then you have the right to have a despotic claim over that piece of land. It means I have the unique and sole claim over this piece of land or this piece of property, and the law or the state is going to use its coercive power to be able to protect my claim upon that property. Then personal property is sort of a division of private property, but it is that in which your person utilizes it either for your own sustenance, for your shelter, or for you to be able to make a living as a human being. So my house, for instance, that I live in is my personal property. But if I had a number of houses listed all over the country, anytime I'm not utilizing that, or I'm not, it's not necessary for my own survival, that is private property. It is a commodity. It is something which has now been coded in such a way that I can monetize it for whatever purposes that I see fit. Now, Pierre Joseph Proudhon, let's talk about him and why he says property is theft. The term property is theft is one that at first blush sounds like, just some radical form of view. But it's actually a very nuanced argument. So if you think about, where do property rights actually come from? Typically, there are two arguments. The first is one of occupancy. If you land on an island and find a group of people already living there, they would claim that they own that piece of land because they occupy it. Now, at a certain point, they were not the occupants there. And you, having showed up, could say, well, I, as a human being, if you recognize me as a human being, I don't exist ex naturalis. I don't exist without the need for air, for water, for physical space in which I can make myself comfortable and continue to live as a person. So that right, that recognition of my right, means that my occupancy of a piece of land is a valid claim. I say I need a place that I can actually live on. Now, the way we combat in terms of those claims can either be done in court, or it can be done in anything that is a social institution that can allow for us to have a proper engagement. Now, the argument from occupancy is such that human beings require a place to live, and therefore, because they occupy a certain piece of land, that they have the right to have exclusivity to that land. But there's no more land that's being created. Now that's the problem, and more human beings are joining the population. I think we're about 8 billion humans now. So every human being that's born, in principle, means that a portion of land would have to be set aside for them. They would need a claim to properties that other people already now have hold to. So in actuality, the occupancy argument falls apart because every human being has the right to occupy something. So you can't occupy it in perpetuity. It only gives you the right to rent it, to borrow it from the commons. So later on in the English law, the philosopher John Locke said, well, my right to possession of property comes from me being able to mix my labor with the land. So there's a barren piece of land. If I show up and decide, well, I'm going to till this land, I buy a hoe, I dig up a piece of land, I till it, I plant some apples, those apples grow, and I'm able to eat off of that tree. I would say I own this apple tree. I have mixed my labor with this piece of land, and therefore I have ownership of it. Proudhon's argument against that would say, well, take the instance of someone going to fish in a lake, let's say Lake Victoria. When I go to fish in Lake Victoria, I'm mixing my labor with the ocean, or with the lake, shall I say. I pull out that fish, it is my effort, it is my sweat, and therefore I have the right to that fish. But I don't own the lake. So why is it that you would say that someone could own a piece of land? Why are we excluding land and saying it's different from, say, air? If I'm sitting in this room and I'm breathing in air, I can't say, I claim this air, can you close your nostrils? These are things that are essential for us to live. Again, the argument from the mixing of labor falls apart. And he asks another pressing question, which is, how is it then that there are people who do not labor and are able to live in perpetuity, simply claiming rents on other people? And the vast majority of people who sell their labor are unable to secure their futures for even more than a day. Now, whatever country you live in, it's pretty damn sure that the vast majority of people that live around you sell their labor. They sell their labor so that they can earn money to pay for rent, to pay for food, so that they can live. They don't have access to, a sort of standard basic level of living. And then there are those who have vast tracts and for whom they allow the means of production to be accessed by those people who labor, but the fruit of that labor goes back to the owners of that piece of property. And this is where we go back to capitalism. Now, I think of late I've been really hard on capitalism. It deserves it. But I think over the next few episodes, I want to break down exactly what the sort of hidden patterns of the socioeconomic system that we live under and the implications of what it means to be an individual in this world are following from that system. So I've been talking about land a lot, and we sort of talked about the difference between private and personal, and also the argument of occupancy versus the argument of mixing labor. The next piece I want to talk about is, if we want to say that we're about justice, what justifies these modes of existence? Someone may argue that it's legal, so I'm doing something within the bounds of the law, therefore it is just. And anyone with my skin color in this world will tell you that for the longest time, well, slavery was legal. You could own a person as property. You could have say over an individual's life and own them as you would, say, cattle, or you would an iPhone. And we fought back against that. So in the debate, in the marketplace of ideas, we need to redefine what we think property actually is. And if there's a claim that has it that property is theft, and all of us seek to own property, we bestow honor upon property owners, I don't think we think we're sort of immoral. And I also struggle with this idea, but I can't help but face the fact that I think Proudhon is right. The way we sort of take from the commons and then say, I'm securing this for me as an individual. And that's where I think maybe it's not the individualism didn't come because of the capitalist mode of production, but the creation of individuals as standalone beings, as almost like the anarcho-libertarian Superman, that you exist in this world and that you get to dominate others and you get to compete, and when you outcompete others, you get to own those items. Rather than the communal view where an individual is just an instance of a communal creation. I am Joel, I am male. All the things that create me being a not so young man, someone who has value, all those things are only recognizable from the community. It is not me, myself, that has that power to create that. And by insisting upon individualism and insisting upon that locus of the individual being a despot, remember that the idea of having a despotic claim that no one else has a right to is a myth. And that myth can easily be broken down by the fact that we pay taxes. We pay into the common pot. If I was truly a despot over the things that I own, no one else would have a legitimate claim over it. But we rightfully understand that there is a legitimate claim that the rest of society has on the things that we have. Society owns just as much as we do. And that's where Proudhon talks about mutualism. So mutualism means that nothing is ever owned by any individual in and of themselves. And this is where we go back to the Milo land issue. The Milo tenure system has it that there are interests that the people who live and make their sort of subsistence on a piece of property, and the person who has had a title that is recognizable in law as the landlord, all have interests in that common property. And one cannot disabuse the other of their interests. Instead, we have to have a meeting of the minds and agree upon what is socially acceptable. Now, in perpetuity, when you look at freehold pieces of property in places like the US, in places like the UK, if you, as an individual, are able to own large tracts of land, like say Bill Gates, who's probably one of the biggest landowners now, that means that you have to pay him in order for you to be a human being, in order for you to subsist. And these laws have now pressed themselves into the digital space. You hear about digital platforms, digital ecosystems that are growing. And that is just an extension of what we think is natural in terms of land ownership, in terms of physical property. We're now taking it to the realm of ideas. There's a really great book called Coding Capital that I would encourage you to read. And one of the examples in the book comes from the actress Angelina Jolie. Now, Angelina Jolie had a double mastectomy in the early part of this millennium. It's because she did a test that discovered that she had a gene that would make her highly predisposable to getting breast cancer. Now, that test cost her $3,000. And she was curious as to how understanding the human genome to get access to some kinds of medicine could cost that much money. I mean, who is that? What is that money going to? Now, several scientists had been looking into discovering that gene, and government funding had gone into discovering what the gene was that would make someone predisposed to getting breast cancer. A private company was able to, sort of sequence what that gene looked like, so they'll be able to understand it and be able to identify it in people and offer them treatment. Now, it was able to patent that. It was able to say, well, this is something that we're holding as our intellectual property. That means we can take it from the commons as information that all of us have access to and say, in order for you to act upon this information, we have to get monetary compensation. Now, the law recognized that as a property right, and eventually different scientists had to come together with people who are interested parties to say that putting a paywall as a blocker for people to be able to test and see if they're going to need medical treatment is inhuman. It took over 20 years, and at least from my understanding, that patent was then deemed, I don't know what the legal term is, illegitimate. But the company that had gotten that special right didn't get to give back all that money. So they had 2 decades in which they could profit off of owning information about the human genome. So the question that we have, if you think about a company like Pfizer, Pfizer made, $100 billion off of the COVID vaccine, and is talking about increasing the cost of getting access to that vaccine, looking at the value that it is providing. And if we think about the extension of this logic of how property rights is moving into healthcare, is moving into education, is moving into the way we relate to each other, I can't help but notice that we are making everything a commodity. We're making everything work under the market logic. And that market logic of privation of personal and private property, and mixing those two things together such that everything around us is private property, is creating individuals who will have at best there will be nomads. You don't own the music you listen to. You don't own the right to even knowledge about the human body. In order for you to get treatment, you have to pay somebody somewhere who had the finances to be able to study and figure out things that should be common knowledge. It's almost like saying that you would patent the idea of gravity. That, oh no, I'm one human being and I discovered gravity, so anytime you're going to use something that has the formula G, you're going to have to pay for it. I mean, that's actually silly, but that's the logic that is dominating right now. So the question I would probably leave with you is, if you think Proudhon is right that property is theft, it sounds silly at the beginning, but again, just as a recap, he's not talking about personal property in terms of the things that you need in order for you to survive, the things that, you've got your plate, you've got the things that you use every day, but really about expanding that usage to becoming a despot, to become, as they say, a king in your own castle, and saying that you can exclude other human beings from things that they require in order for them to live. That logic is, he says, unjust. It is unjust because none of us created this world. We all find ourselves born. We all find ourselves in need of certain things for us in order to survive. And society is the only one that apportions those rights accordingly. And usually that's done through the law. But the law is determined often by interests of power. The people that have access to the highest legal protections, the people that have access to the traditional forms of interpretation are going to maintain the status quo. But if we want to create a much fairer world, we probably have to look ourselves in the mirror and say the conceptions we have of property are not helpful, and these are extending even into the virtual world. A virtual world where a company like, say, Amazon owns about half of the internet. The internet is supposed to be free for everyone, but you pay for access. Everything is hosted by one organization. That means the data that exists also about you is owned by that person. So everything that is considered a technological advancement, it is only an advancement in terms of tools, but the logic, the philosophical engagement, the relations of power, the modes of production are not changing. And as long as those things don't change, we will see the same replication of the power dynamics that already exist in the world that we live in. And well, I don't know about you, but I think that doesn't sit well with me. I'll close with one quote from Proudhon in which he says, the rights to a product are private, but the rights to the means of production are common. They belong to all of us because we are all equal in the eyes of God, in the eyes of each other. And I think that's a right worth fighting for. Let me know what you think, and thank you for your time and for listening to What the Theory today. My name is Joel. Have a good week.